Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to this new program series that we're introducing here at our Family History Month, actual virtual Family History Month 2021. So glad a few of you have been able to join us this afternoon. My name is Kurt Witcher, and this is the first of 4 Wednesdays with Witcher. Wanted to again welcome you to this experimental program type that we're trying out this virtual Family History Month. And again, thanks so much for joining us. These short 30-minute programs are really what I would call a non-program. It's more like a conversation, sharing of thoughts that are on my mind about things that I think are consequential to us, you and me, as family historians, as people who care about family history, things that are consequential for us to do better research, to make better connections, to do better at preserving and making our family stories more available, not just to us and our generation, but to future generations. Again, I'm Kurt Witcher, and it's great to have you here because this is not really a program, if we can say that. There's no handout. Eventually, this program will be on the Genealogy Center's YouTube channel. You can find that simply by going to the Genealogy Center's main page, genealogycenter.org, scroll all the way down to the bottom and click on YouTube. That's where you will find all of our YouTube programs. And there are close to 100 now, and certainly after Family History Month, maybe mid to late November, about the time that Thanksgiving rolls around, we'll be able to be thankful for well over 110, 120 new YouTubes for us to enjoy during the holiday season. So this afternoon, kick back, listen to my thoughts and musings about listening, and see if there's a takeaway or two. About a month ago, we stopped using Zoom meetings, and we started using Zoom Webinar. Looks a little different and functions a little different. So with Zoom Webinar, the flavor of Zoom that we're using now, you have a Q&A option and a chat option. We always invite you to use chat to crowd share information, to crowdsource questions, to interact with each other. If you have a question for me, and we'll have very limited time because we want to keep this to 30 minutes, we'll have very limited time for questions, but if you want to pop a question into the Q&A, that's the place to put it, in the Q&A bubble, not in the chat bubble, because we probably won't field any questions from chat. That's really for you to enjoy and to benefit from each other's knowledge and experience. So I have about 5 minutes till the bottom of the hour, and we have a couple dozen people with us so far, and maybe a few more will join before we actually hit the bottom of the hour. Again, welcome. I hope you have been enjoying your Family History Month, and I hope you've taken some active steps in doing something for yourself, for your family stories during Family History Month. We have an engagement activity every single day of this month. If it's not a program, it's a little short session like this, or it's a Facebook post, or it's some other type of engagement. I would just encourage you to take advantage of all those opportunities. Tomorrow, I want to invite you to attend our Thursday evening program. We've been doing Thursday evening programs at 6:30 for more than a year because it's the first Thursday of the month. Our DNA expert and great colleague, Sarah Allen, will be presenting on interpreting DNA results. That's at 6:30 tomorrow evening. I don't know about you, but every time I hear a DNA presentation, even if I think, oh, that sounds familiar, or I've heard this speaker before, I always get like an amazing number of, oh, gee, I forgot that, or oh, I never knew that, or oh, this is a really interesting and useful way to look at this particular challenge or that particular challenge. So invite you to join us. Sarah is a great explainer. It's really easy to follow what she does and to follow her thought process in interpreting your genealogy DNA results. So that's tomorrow evening at 6:30. It should be a great time, and I invite you to listen to a really fine presentation tomorrow. Again, welcome to our first Wednesday with Witcher. Witcher would be me, Kurt Witcher, manager of the Genealogy Center. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, there's no handout for this session because it's not really a presentation. It's my thoughts that I really want to share with you about listening. And I have 3 other areas where I want to muse with you on the second, third, and fourth Wednesdays of October. And we'll just see how this goes and whether you find it useful. In the chat, if you want to, if you are so inclined, drop me a message toward the end letting me know if this was useful to you or not, or send an email to genealogy@acpl.info. That's a way you can also ask any questions. So if you put a question into Q&A that we didn't get around to answering before the end of the half hour, go ahead and send it to genealogy@acpl.info. My colleagues are awesome at answering questions because at the end of the day, we have 2 things we want to help you be as a family historian. Number 1, we want to help you be successful, right? And number 2, we want to help you have fun. If we're not having fun, then we're doing something wrong. And our family history endeavors are not what they should be. So success and enjoyment is what we would like to offer to you. And there's an awesome group of people here at the library that can help you be successful and have a good time as well. So welcome again to our first Wednesday with Witcher. And we'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to sneak a peek at my smartphone, which has a better clock than most of the other phones I have access to. And we are about 3 minutes away from the bottom of the hour. Again, you can find future programs, a PDF of our virtual family history month on genealogycenter.org, the website that's on your screen right now. Take advantage of the many resources that are linked there. I'm going to move off of this particular slide and go to the beginning slide as we're approaching the bottom of the hour. I know it's a bit of a play on words, but let's talk about listening. I'm a firm believer in life being lived in the small places. It's the accumulation of small everyday things done well, done really well, that makes the difference. Sometimes we look for the grand, we look for the big, we think, oh, wow, this is going to make a difference. As an incrementalist, I believe that life is lived in the small places, and it's that whole collection of small things, everyday things, normal things done really well that makes us successful. I know we've all heard the question, how do you eat an elephant? Well, I've heard a few people lately say, why in the world would you want to eat an elephant? Well, that's a great question as well. But to answer the question, how do you eat an elephant? Bite at a time, right? So I too agree. Why would you want to eat an elephant? So let's begin. Let's talk about listening. So for many years early in my career, I really wondered why people are curious about and why are they so passionate about genealogy, about family history. And I guess I'm not the quickest wit or the fastest learner because it took me a while to have what I consider an aha moment for me. And that aha moment was, it's all about story, right? No matter what we're focusing on, whether it's joining a lineage society, whether it's preparing for a family reunion, whether it's planning our bucket list trip to our ancestral hometown, it's all about finding our stories. And I think, again, no matter the focus, no matter the mission, our drive is about finding our stories. And what's neat about that is that everyone has a story. So everyone has a chance to search for, to get assistance with, and to be successful and enjoy finding their stories. That is so important, so very critical. That's why we do what we do. So we know that passion. We feel that passion. And how are we most successful in finding our stories? Well, there are many ways, but one of the ways is talking with people. We dig through the records for those people who aren't with us, as well as digging through the records for people that are still living. But a big part of what we do, isn't it, is talking with, having conversations with individuals, right? So having a conversation can be really key to finding our stories. Another challenge we have, along with trying to find all of our stories, is what many of us have been sort of sounding the alarm about for many years, and that is the loss of living memory. If you're not familiar with the term, you may be asking, so, Kurt, what is living memory? Living memory is those facts, those stories, that information that we all carry around in our head. And I know we all say, yeah, I'll get around to journaling. I'll get around to recording with a voice recorder. I'll get around to keying it in a program someday. I'll get around to it. And then we don't. I can't tell you how many times every single year for nearly half a century, I have heard individuals say, oh, but I was going to talk to my great aunt, my grandfather, my fill in the blank. I didn't expect them to die. I didn't expect them not to be able to communicate with me. We've had that experience way too often, way more often than we should, than we want to. It's because I believe we haven't committed to preserving and presenting, sharing living memory, our living memory, and being intentional about interviewing and talking with family members older than us, the same age as us, and even younger than us that have stories and information about members of our family, have stories and information about our story. So, living memory, we need to pay more attention to living memory. So, if we're about finding our stories, and a piece, I would argue, a consequential piece of our stories is wrapped up, woven into, contained by living memory, then oh my goodness, we need to have more and better conversations. And I believe, Kurt believes, a big part of that is our ability to listen better. Educators and sociologists have been starting to sound the alarm on what is being called conversational competency. And what sociologists and educators are telling us is that we have a big crisis in conversational competency. We're not good anymore. We're not fossil anymore about having a conversation. Again, I believe a big part of that is we're not listening. If we're not having conversations, if we're just having bully pulpit moments, if we're just having moments where I can spew out what I believe, regardless of foundation or fact, if I can just tell you my experiences, I'm not going to get the other side. I'm not going to get the whole story. So, conversational competency. Pause a moment and think about that. What is conversational competency? How good am I at having a conversation? You know, some of the best conversationalists I've ever had the fortune, from my middle school days to present, some of the best conversationalists I've had the great fortune of experiencing, when I think back, when I reflect, they talk very little. They have great body language. They have awesome eye contact. They ask really fine questions. They have great follow-up questions, but if you put a stopwatch on it, the number of minutes and seconds that they're actually talking, very few. And I find that interesting. If you talk to really good salespeople, he or she will tell you, they will tell you, yeah, to kind of get some rapport built, it isn't me throwing things at you. It's me getting to know you by asking good questions and listening attentively to responses. Conversational competency. So, how are we doing with that? How are we doing with our conversational competencies? If you're talking, you're not listening. I know some people might say, whoa, wait a minute, Kurt, I can do both. I'm a pretty talented, I'm a pretty smart guy. Think about it. If you're talking, you're not listening. I think that's pretty broad brush, but if we kind of plant that idea in our minds as I need to be more mindful of that, then maybe we will listen a little more than we articulate. If you find yourself in conversations at family reunions, at the dinner table, after dinner, after a weekend, repose sessions, if you find yourself talking more than 50% of the time, you're really not listening. You're not providing others with an opportunity to share their story, and you're not listening. I have seen so many interviews go off the tracks very quickly on in the interview because our listening skills are not well honed and are not well leveraged. If you're going to talk to a great aunt or a grandparent or a nephew or a niece or a cousin, first cousin, second cousin, and you end up talking most of the time, you haven't gotten their story. Not completely, not totally. And our family stories, our collection of family stories, will suffer because of that. If you're talking more than half the time, you are not listening. So, a good conversation, we've seen this, heard this, almost to the point of being deaf to it. A good conversation, two parts to a good conversation, right? Talking and listening, and they're not in equal measure, my opinion. If you're doing an interview, you want to have a good conversation, but you're interviewing, so you want to open those channels of information, of story, and you want to listen really well so that you can add it to the richness of your family's stories. Conversation, talking and listening, and not of equal parts. So, how do we prepare to really listen? I have some really basic tips, suggestions. I'm kind of a back to basics guy. So, this isn't rocket science here. This isn't like, oh my gosh, what a marvelous, wonderful Einstein like thing Kurt has just said. If you're expecting that, I fear you're going to be disappointed. But how do we prepare to really listen? Well, I'm going to preface this slide by saying I know I'm in a minority here, and I will own that. I will totally admit that. If you talk to academicians who are oral history experts, if you talk to many historians, local historians, social historians, they tend to like to research the person that they're interviewing. They do all kinds of deep dives to find out everything about that person's life. And then right after that deep dive, they begin to form a huge, long list of questions. I will concede there may be a place for that sometime in an interaction with a family member, but a good conversation, first and foremost, should start with good listening. So I'm not a fan of having to do extensive amounts of research. Not necessary, my opinion. Turning on, polishing off, ramping up our listening skills, that will make for a good interview, for a good conversation. Yes, it will make for a good conversation. So, doing a lot of homework, developing a rich biography, and then coming up with a long list of questions. That's really antithetical to good listening. Because when you have a long list of questions, let's just admit it. We don't have to be type A people. If we have a long list of questions, what's going to be first and foremost on our mind? What question am I going to ask next? Am I going to get through all my questions? What if I skip a question and we're missing the answers to the question or questions that we've asked? So, not a fan of huge dives into biographies and huge lists of questions. Not necessary to have a good conversation. I like StoryCorps a lot. I know most, if not all of you, enjoying this presentation this afternoon know of StoryCorps. I like their great questions. Pick a favorite one or two great questions from StoryCorps or whatever other question silo you find on the web. And literally, in 5 minutes, you can find more than 10,000 examples of questions that people recommend you ask in a family history, family related interview. That's more than enough questions. I like going to StoryCorps and I like choosing one of their 4 great questions. My 3 favorite of the 4 great questions you see on your screen. My very favorite is the first one. Any question that you ask during an interview, you want to make it an open-ended question. That means a question that cannot be answered by yes or no. Were you angry? Yes, I was angry. Were you happy? No, I was not happy. You want open-ended questions. And I like questions that entice me to listen. So I would recommend coming to an interview with this first question. How has your life been different than what you'd imagined? I find that a great question because you don't know where that's going to go. And that's okay. In fact, that's really good because to continue the conversation, it entices, it encourages you to listen. What's the response? And how can I just enjoy the chapter, the section of my family story this family member is giving to me? We don't need to worry about what's going to go on next, what's going to happen next. That'll come. That'll come based on the answer that you receive. So get a great question. I love StoryCorps because of their great questions. How has your life been different than what you'd expected, what you'd imagined? Who has been the kindest to you in your life? How would you like to be remembered? Great questions can't be answered by yes or no. And it's okay to pause. I know it might sound a little head scratching, but listen to the silence. In just a moment or two, I'll have a couple of more tips, but eye contact, body language, really important. You can tell when you've asked a question and someone is thinking about it, musing about it, maybe even trying to understand the depth or the breadth of the question. Let them do that. Be engaging with your eyes and your smile and your facial expressions. It's okay to pause. It helps enhance our listening. In that pause segment in any interview, and those pauses may happen numerous times, our thought shouldn't be, oh my goodness, this is going to heck in a handbasket. Oh, I need to come up with a better question. Oh, I made the person uncomfortable. Oh. No, just back it up. Just put it on pause. It's okay for the interviewee to pause, and it's okay for you as the interviewer to pause because you're set up to listen. It's okay to pause because you're going to be ready to listen. We don't need to jump in. We can tell if we're plugged in to someone's facial expressions and their body language if they're struggling with a question. And maybe the pause will have them ask us to restate, what do we really mean? Is this okay to answer it that way? And if someone ever asks you during an interview if it's okay, the answer is always yes. So it's okay to pause. So that's one thing that throws a lot of people off and takes them out of their listening game. Oh my goodness, the person isn't talking. That's okay. The second thing that sometimes takes people out of their game is when the interviewee turns into the interviewer. And all of a sudden, we're kind of thrown because someone will ask, what was the most unexpected thing in your life? And they may give you a very brief answer and then flip it around and say, what was yours? Oftentimes, we will get nudged out of our listening mode by the person we're interviewing when they turn around and become the interviewer. That's okay. That's expected. For a number of people, that's a defense mechanism. They're feeling a little uncomfortable. So you should be asking yourself, how can I make them feel more comfortable? But if they flip it on you, if they've asked you the question, give a brief but meaningful answer and then flip it back. And I have 4 examples. They're not the greatest in the world, but they've worked for me. So if I ask someone a question about their early childhood and they ask me about something they've heard about me, my early childhood, I try to give an honest but brief answer. And then I will use a variety of one of these 4 questions and maybe even concoct a question that's a combination of a couple of these questions, but something like, why do you ask? Or what similar reaction or what similar experience have you had? Or if I've said something that makes someone, because I'm watching their language, their body language, I'm watching their eyes, watching their facial expressions. If it looks like I've made someone uneasy, unhappy, sad, or very happy, that's a legitimate way to flip the conversation back to listening to their responses rather than providing your own response. Why do you laugh? Why did you laugh at that? It looks like I put a twinkle in your eye. Why do you have a twinkle in your eye? Seems like my answer made you sad. Why did my answer make you sad? That's a way of getting the conversation back to where you're listening and the individual that you're trying to interview, that you're wanting to interview, is doing more of the talking. I hope that makes sense. Another thing with interviewing and keeping our listening skills high and finely tuned is go with the flow. And again, that's why I push back on having these long lists of prescribed questions. We're just going down, check off, check off, check off. I'm on my 4th question. Oh my gosh, I'm only scheduled for an hour with this person. They got to go to a medical appointment, and I'm only on my 4th question, and I have 27 more to do. You can eliminate all that stress, all that noise by just having a good first couple of questions and going with the flow. If I can just narrate this image on your screen right now a little bit. So someone might ask Grandpa here, so where are you going with your grandson today? Oh, I don't know. We're just walking down the road, seeing what pebbles we might kick, what grass we might see, what flowers we might point out. That's kind of like our conversations. Our interview should be go with the flow when you're having a conversation, when you're trying to listen. Listen intently to what's being said, not what your next question is going to be, not where you're going to go, not the fact that the interviewee has taken you in a completely different path, on a completely different track that you weren't prepared for. Well, you don't need to worry about being prepared for something if you just go with the flow. If you're prepared to go with the flow, so you may be talking or asking or trying to engage someone about their early childhood. Maybe you're fascinated because they grew up going to a one-room schoolhouse in rural Kentucky, like my father-in-law. And you're really wanting to know about that. And as you're not listening, or listening just a little bit, and my father-in-law goes off and talks about all the mischief they got into, which leads to snowball fights, which leads to sabotaging coal mining, dinky engine tracks. You're thinking, oh my gosh, I wanted him to talk about the one-room schoolhouse, and now we're talking. It's okay. It's part of his story, and you will get a lot of richness, a lot of great data out of that story if you listen. Listen. So go with the flow. It's okay if you don't get to that special subject you wanted to talk about. You can always try again. It's okay if you want to know about one-room schoolhouses and now you're talking about snowball fights and boys being boys, mischievous little activities of boys who are just having fun growing up in a rural part of the country. So go with the flow. I really like this a lot. And the next couple of slides may be a little forward. I'll own that, but they're critical. They're critical if we're going to talk about listening. Listen to learn, not to respond. You don't have to affirm, deny, embellish, frame, polish anything that someone tells you. Listen to learn. Oh, now I know a little bit more about my great grandmother. Now I know a little bit more about growing up in a small German town in southern Indiana called Jasper. Listen to learn, not to respond. Oftentimes, and I think some of it comes from us not being confident enough as interviewers, are part of an interviewee, part of an interview experience. We're not confident enough. So we're always worried about responding. Listen to learn, not to respond. You don't have to respond. You're just learning. And don't respond with your body language either, like frown if you don't like or agree with something being said. Be a pleasant, neutral, softly, gently smiling face because you're listening. You're listening to learn. You don't need to respond. Don't multitask while you're trying to have an interview because you're not listening. If you're fussing around with a recorder, that's why you never bring a new recorder to an interview. Use a tried and true one that you're familiar with, one that you can set it and forget it. That's why you don't have pages and pages of questions, because you don't need to be fiddling with your questions. You don't need to be looking at your smart device. You don't need to be taking text. You don't need to be taking little noise devices that are alerting us to your appointments in an hour. Don't multitask. You're either all in or you're out. You're all in or you're all out. There's no in between. Well, I'll kind of sort of listen. Well, if you're kind of sort of listening, then you're not. And you're going to miss a lot. Not only are you going to miss what's being said, but the person you're trying to listen to, is going to notice where they rank at that moment on your priority. Now the papers, the lists of questions are now more important than they are. Your device, your recording device, is now more important than they are. I know that sounds a little sideways, but it's true. Listen, don't multitask, don't fuss around with things. You're all in or you're all out. Be engaged. There's so much in the oral history literature and the oral history knowledge base, if you will, that talks about, well, repeat the statement back to the person to show them that you're listening. Do this, smile real widely to show them that you're engaged. Why do you have to show anyone that you're listening if you're actually listening? Why do you have to show anyone that you're engaged if you're actually engaged? I know that sounds a little silly, but think about it. Why do we have to put on like we're listening? Why do we have to put on like we're engaged if we're really engaged? So park the rest of the world, park the devices, park the multiple lists of questions, and just listen. Eye contact, body language. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. If you have trouble making eye contact, if you have trouble having a positive body language, practice, because that's going to help you listen. When you have a great rapport, it's going to be easier to listen. And how do you establish rapport? With your eyes, you talk words of comfort. With your facial expression, you talk words of acceptance, of non-judgment. They will say things. You will listen. You will find your family stories. Don't pontificate. Oh my goodness, don't pontificate. You brought a person to be interviewed. You're there to listen. No one cares what you think. If you want to pontificate, start a blog, have your own WordPress page, and pontificate all you want. If you want to pontificate, go to Facebook, pontificate there. Pontificating is not part of an interview. You don't need to validate your question. You don't need to validate yourself. You're not on trial, and you don't have to validate your opinion. If someone tells you that the moon is truly made out of Swiss cheese, we kind of know that's not true, but we don't have to make that statement. We don't have to make that judgment. We don't have to make that declaration in an interview. We can continue to listen. Don't use an interview to pontificate, to show someone else how smart you are, to show them how much you already know about them. Not necessary. And it closes down our opportunity to listen. Listening has nothing to do with pontification. I like the next slide pretty well. Don't equate your experiences to theirs. It's never the same. If you lost a parent and I lost a parent, there's no way those loss experiences could be the same. They're not. They're never the same. I have been involved in so many interviews where someone says, "Oh yeah, I know what you mean." And then the interviewer goes off pontificating and trying to say that her or his experience was the same as mine. And I can tell you from the numerous times I've been interviewed both by family members and for stuff, if you will, in the genealogy space, whenever someone tries to equate their experience with mine, it's never the same. It's never the same. Recently, I've had 2 opportunities to listen to an interview where someone has indicated the loss of a close one. And the interviewer, "Oh, I know what you mean. It must be so hard," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, you don't know what it is, and you don't need to know. And when we're trying to equate our experiences to the experience of the person we're talking to, we're not listening. We're trying to supra establish a rapport that we could establish other ways. We don't need to create that link. And oftentimes, if you watch such interviews, the interviewer who's trying to create that, "My experience is the same as yours," has just cut short the person who was beginning to tell or continuing to tell or finishing telling their story. Don't equate your experiences to others. They are not the same. It cuts communication, and it means you're not listening. It's not about you. I tell people that so much. In the interview, it's not about you. It's about the person you're interviewing. So you don't need to pontificate. You don't need to make it like you know what it's like to lose your home, lose a loved one, lose a child, lose an animal, celebrate an Olympic victory, win a marathon, win a new car. It's not about you. Sometimes that helps us listen better. I hope the few moments we've spent together this afternoon will help you really listen.